Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV. Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everyone, Ken Reed here, your TV Guidance Counselor on the show TV Guidance Counselor, as we make our way into my preferred season, the autumn, and you know, I know days and seasons don't mean much these days, but we're sort of barreling towards Halloween, and also episode 500 of the show. If you are new to the show, I am an on hiatus Boston stand-up comedian here in the United States. I pick an old issue of TV Guide magazine generally from my personal collection, scan it, send someone the PDF, they sit down and go through what they'd watched that week, and then we talk about their choices. Sometimes we just talk TV and talk with people who've made TV and been on TV, and sometimes my dog barks. All kinds of fun things happen. These are the result of when you're a one-man show, which is me. I'm the producer, host, and all that. My guest this week is the fantastic writer, performer, musician Charlie Higson. Charlie was in a band in the early to mid-'80s called the Higsons, who you may or may not have heard of, although I know my guests do love their 80s indie rock. In addition, he is a performer creator on shows like The Fast Show, was the producer of Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, Swiss Tony, did a ton of stuff with Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer, Paul Whitehouse, just amazing writer, done so many funny, great things, and is a fantastic author as well. He's written a ton of books, including King of Ants, which I think was his first book, which weird that we don't talk about here, but it was one of Stuart Gordon's last movies, and George Wendt of Cheers fame read the novel, and he was friends with Stuart Gordon from Chicago theater days, and he got this movie made, and Charlie wrote the screenplay. I'm surprised we didn't talk about that, but we pretty much cover everything else, so I think you'll enjoy it very much. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Charlie Higson.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Live via satellite from sunny London, England. Charlie Higson, how are you?
I'm pretty good, yeah. Surviving these strange times.
Yeah, it's, as a writer, I imagine you're always on lockdown anyway. Like me, I was built for this, but...
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I'm speaking to you from my room at home where I work, and I'd been locked down there for the past several years, and it didn't make a lot of difference. For my kids, it's a different story. That's, their lives have been just weird and put on hold. But for me, I've just plodded on, and, I think everybody had a kind of weird start to it all.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Sort of anxiety, and it was uncertainty. Nobody really knew where it was going to go. And then, so didn't get a lot of work done. But then as it dragged on, I sort of from summer of 2020 onwards, I kind of threw myself into several projects, actually. So
yeah, you've been writing more books, and are you doing more TV stuff currently?
Those are the two things. The main things is I wrote 4 adult crime books in the early 90s, and then the TV side of my career kind of took over, and I didn't write any more adult books until 25 years later. I went back to my editor, who'd waited patiently for 25 years, and I said, I've got an idea for a new one. Do you fancy it? And he said, yeah, let's have a look. So I thought, yeah, great. That's a perfect kind of lockdown project. And then the other thing is it's a big TV series for the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
And you've just reminded me. I did send a message to say whether I was allowed to talk about this, because I haven't officially. Let's have a look.
Okay. Breaking news, everybody.
Yeah, no, I did. I said, is it okay for me to talk about this as it hasn't been officially announced? And they've said, yes, go ahead, Charlie. I don't think it has been announced, but it's fine.
Oh, yeah, scoop.
A big fantasy series for MBC, which is Middle Eastern Broadcasting Corporation, which is based in Saudi Arabia, and thereby hangs a tale. What you want me? You're making an expectant face. You want it all now, or do you want me to kind of eke it out through the show?
Let's eke it out throughout the show. I'll have a running thread here because, well, let's back up a little bit for, so I'm a big fan of all the stuff that you've done, and I'm a comedian, and I was in punk bands, and you're one of those people that's sort of in the nexus of those two things for me.
Yes.
My cat is yelling at a bird out the window, everybody. I don't have someone being tortured in the background. But the first thing I think I saw that you did was actually, and I don't think you were on camera for this, but the first time I saw your name was probably Randall and Hopkirk Deceased.
Yep, although I was in every episode. I played a different character in every episode, very small part.
Hitchcock.
Yes, I was a showrunner on that, and the producer and lead writer. And yes, I thought, well, I might as well cast myself in it as well, which I did. Yeah, well, I mean, that was sort of stage 2 of my TV career, moving more into drama. Because I mean, it all started with comedy. I mean, actually, my career started in England, where we made an English version of Saturday Night Live, inspired by it.
It's very different in execution.
Yeah, well, when it started, they tried to keep it similar to the American one. There was a different host each week, but it had more of a sort of live feel, more of a sort of stand-up show, entertainment show, lots of live music, big audience kind of standing in front of the stage. So it was less sketch-based than the American one, and then as it went on, they dropped the idea of the different hosts each week because it made the show very variable, and they wanted to keep it of a certain standard.
And then they changed it to Friday Live, I think, for a while as well.
Yeah, they
right?
changed it to Friday Live.
But it was like Stephen Wright was on that. There was a bunch of American comics that would show up every now
all the big
Emo Phillips.
All the big American stand-ups at the time came over and did stuff on it. It was late 80s, so it was a time when stand-up was really coming into its own, certainly in the UK. I think it had probably been a bigger deal in the States before, but nobody had ever really known how to do stand-up on TV to make it work, and particularly, American stand-ups who the audience wouldn't necessarily know. But on the back of the whole alternative comedy and the sort of punk ethic in stand-up in the UK, that was the first big show that showed most, for most British people, they hadn't seen the British stand-ups either, unless they'd been to see them live. So it was a great showcase for stand-ups, UK stand-ups, American stand-ups.
To give people a little background, and I've talked about this on my show before, but unlike here, where we had the sort of what's the deal with stand-up, which was the mainstream, the stand-up in the UK was sort of that working men's club comics, 70s, sort of old, somewhat racist kind of joke book jokes. And then you had this punk rock fueled alternative revolution that sort of became the mainstream, and it's a lot of the comic strip people, the young ones is a big thing, that sort of had become the mainstream of comedy in the UK by the time Saturday Live was starting. Yeah.
And interestingly, in the UK, that all those acts who'd started live on the alternative comedy circuit, they really became known for doing sort of comedy shows like sitcoms, like the young ones, before anyone really had seen any of their actual stand-up material and what they had done live. So Rick Mail and Ade Edmondson from the young ones, when they came to do Saturday Night Live, they went back and redid a lot of their sort of stuff that they'd been doing as stand-up before.
Dangerous.
So we'd had that traditional comedy, which was that whole sort of cabaret circuit, traditional telling mother-in-law jokes, wearing the kind of tuxedo, and the stand-ups wouldn't write their own material. They'd have gag writers, and it was seen as very old-fashioned and out of date and politically incorrect. So it was all sort of thrown out the window by the alternative comedy stuff that has been with us ever since. So and Saturday Night Live in the UK was a huge, very influential show for actually finally getting that stuff on TV.
Because one of the things that they would have in sort of, and this is a tradition in the UK that we didn't really have here much, but people would often do stand-up as a character. It was a lot of character monologue stand-ups.
Yes.
And so Harry Enfield, who was a guy that you guys knew from college, I think, you and Paul Whitehouse?
Yeah, he was a school friend of one of our best friends from college. Yeah,
he was doing a few different characters live and had gotten booked to do. I think maybe was Loads of Money the first one, or Stavros was one of the first.
Stavros was the first one he did on the show. Yeah. I mean, we've always had a strong tradition in the UK of character-based comedy, which I guess Saturday Night Live in the States is the same. Where those stand-ups would develop all those regular characters, like Wayne's World and all that stuff like that.
But would do more sketches instead of sort of to the audience monologues. I think that was the main difference.
Yeah, but so English music hall, as it was called, the variety theatre, there would be a lot of character comedians that would come on, and they would have their characters that people would get to know and love, and catchphrases. Was
it a Fast Show sketch where Paul did the "Where's my washboard" guy?
Yeah, we did. We sort of parodied that whole world, and yeah, I mean, because that character was based on sort of British musical characters, but it was also based on the idea of when you get into a sort of heavily catchphrase based comedy, that the act can get sort of reduced to a sort of absurd thing that unless you've been following this character and knew all the catchphrases, makes absolutely no sense at all. Steve Martin wrote a fantastic book about his comedy career. There's a really interesting bit there where he talks about why he quit doing his act, which has got huge. He was doing these huge stadiums because he said that very thing, that it had been reduced to him pressing these buttons. It's like, right, I put the arrow through my head, huge laugh. I say this, huge laugh. I say this catchphrase, huge laugh. He said there was no work in it. There was no skill. It literally was pressing buttons. And he sort of said he was starting to go mad. It made no sense. And that is the weird thing about a catchphrase, is you repeat it enough times and people want you to keep repeating it, and they will laugh uproariously every time you say it, even though a catchphrase in itself is nothing particularly funny. It's
like a reminder of something they liked before.
Yes, exactly.
It's basically going, hey, remember? Yeah. And they're like, yeah.
Yeah, and so we on the Fast Show, the show that we did later on in the 90s was we were parodying that. We were showing an act that was completely catchphrase based and there was no sense to it at all, but the audiences were wetting themselves.
Which was sort of a comment on the Fast Show as well, which aired here. I think it was called Brilliant here, and aired a little bit late night.
It was interesting because we made the first Fast Show series in '94 and sort of ended the main stuff of doing it by the 2000s, and then it was before a lot of the English stuff got sold and shown in America. I think the big breakthrough on that front, I think, was Ricky Gervais with The Office, getting that on the screens in America, and I think the TV just changed a lot. People got less insular in the new millennium and were more open to stuff from other cultures. And yeah, so the Fast Show was shown on BBC America, and they said, "Oh, we can't call it the Fast Show. It's not going to work in the States. We're going to change the name to Brilliant." And anybody who knows anything about marketing and branding and creating a product knows you don't change it.
Yeah,
you don't change the name.
You're importing an established thing that's popular.
Yeah. So I think 7 or 8 people in America did see it.
Me being one.
But no, it didn't take off. We had a few sort of celebrity friends who were sort of Anglophiles who'd watched it, but no, we never managed to sell it to America. I mean, it was very English. There are quite a lot of English cultural references. But I know that a lot of Americans who have managed to see it have enjoyed it.
But English sketch comedy, I mean, one of the things that never really translates internationally or is the hardest to translate is comedy because it tends to be so local. So the things that we usually export are like action shows or crime shows or that sort of stuff. And I imagine the American shows that you saw growing up that were imported by like ITV or whatever were probably more like action and drama shows.
Well, we did get the big sitcoms. We've always got the biggest and the best of the American sitcoms, which makes English people believe that all American comedy is absolutely amazing.
Oh my!
You have to say, look, we're seeing like the top 5% probably here. But no, I mean, growing up in the '60s, we had the big American shows and MASH and Star Trek and all those other ones.
Yeah.
But no, we'd always had, and it had always been slightly arbitrary of which sitcoms from America we had and which we didn't. And I never worked out why. For some reason, Sergeant Bilko was always on all through my childhood, and it was always on early in the evening as if it was a kids show.
But it's amazing.
So everybody. It's a brilliant show, yeah, and he's absolutely fantastic, and as a sort of piece of, great character comedy with all the great, it was very influential on what I've done. But you kind of think, yeah, that was on all the time, and then you get other shows huge in the States, like Gilligan's Island, for instance. I've never seen it.
Not missing much.
Whereas, but it seems to be sort of central to American culture of a certain period, and Americans would always talk about it, and you'd think, well, what is
that? Yeah, or the Brady Bunch is another big one that
Brady Bunch. We got the Brady Bunch. We got all the cartoons, the Hanna-Barbera and the Top Cat and Yogi Bear and all that lot.
Top Cat being Bilko, basically, anyway.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think what the other American sitcoms that we always got were.
It's interesting, too, like while you're trying to remember some, like the biggest sort of linchpins of American comedy, which, especially in the 60s and 70s, which were the sort of late night talk shows, which did not translate at all. And you never really had an equivalent. Graham Norton's probably the closest sort of thing, but he's different.
Jonathan Ross was the first one. He was obsessed with American culture, and he loved the late night shows. And he did a show on Channel 4 called The Last Resort, which he had the desk and the cityscape behind him, and he had a lot of American guests on, people like Steve Martin, and he had his house band, and actually that was pretty successful. And in many ways, Graham Norton has kind of took over his seat. For various reasons we won't go into now. But yeah, we and again, going back to what we were talking before, that those late night talk shows were always a great showcase for stand-ups. So again, we didn't get them. We had early evening chat shows,
which are not different vibe,
completely different vibe, and they would be much more mainstream. Wouldn't do that sort of odd, weird comedy bits and pieces and stuff like that. Going back to working with Harry Enfield. Harry had done characters live and started doing them on TV and became the sort of on the UK version of Saturday Night Live. It settled down into being a regular group of people either doing stand-up or characters or little sketches or whatever. And on the back of that, Harry became very popular, and we did a big national tour that he was doing, and the support act on that was Craig Ferguson, and it was quite interesting because we would also then go over to the big comedy festival in Montreal, Just for Laughs. I went over there 2 or 3 times as a writer, working for Harry and working for Craig and a couple of other friends who were doing stuff out there, and Craig Ferguson did that. And you're talking about comedy not translating, and a lot of the British comedy is kind of slightly diffident, slightly sort of self-effacing. But Craig had that big American brashness, where he would go out there in a big suit and he would command an audience and shout them down. And on the back of that, he he was hired to go out and do shows in the States, and ended up doing the late
Late show. Yeah, he took over for Craig Kilborn, but even that show, like, he broke format. Like, he would come out and not do a monologue. He would just do like whatever the hell he was thinking at up top, and sometimes he would have one guest for the whole hour and do different stuff. And so after I imagine when you were working with Craig, it was after the Elvis Hitler stuff that he first.
Bing Hitler.
Oh, Bing Hitler. That's it, right? Yes.
He had just dropped the Bing Hitler persona, and just went out as Craig Ferguson, and as a stand-up, and he was very ambitious, and he liked that whole American scene. And the weird thing was, he became quite a big name in the States, and most people in this country never heard of him. So
same as John Oliver now, like John Oliver.
Well, yeah, there are more people, now, because we get more of that. Because
World's smaller.
There's more outlets for showing that kind of stuff over here. Yeah, people do know John Oliver better than they know Craig. But and I always thought it was quite funny that he did that for years, and nobody over here ever heard about it. And then Corden takes over, and suddenly it's the biggest thing on the internet. I don't know how
things to say about that, but
yes.
But I won't bore you with that. But so post the Harry Enfield stuff, you and I think I know how this happened, but you kind of hooked up with Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer and Jonathan Ross, who was kind of doing their Big Night Out show live on Channel 4. I think this was probably late 80s.
Yeah, Jonathan Ross had his own production company, and in the 80s, got to know Vic and Bob.
Because they were doing New Cross Inn. Was it New Cross Inn? They were doing
it was the it was a theatre in New Cross, sort of theatre stroke club.
New Cross Tavern, maybe, I think it was.
Well, originally they were in the Goldsmiths Tavern.
Yes.
And then they moved to it was called something like the Empire New Cross or something. I should know, but I don't. Vic Reeves, Bob Mortimer were doing, they would do a run of about, I think it must have been about 7 or 8 shows in a run, and it would be like 2 or 3 hours every Sunday night, and it would be a new show every week. And nobody else was doing anything like that. Because they had their personas, and they had the regular characters they did, and they had games, they had bands on, they had other acts on, and me and my friend Paul Whitehouse, who we'd met at university and formed a punk band in the late 70s.
Right Hand Lovers.
The Right Hand Lovers, yes. Done your research. We did, we said, look, we really want to be involved in this somehow, and we'd turn up and they'd say, okay, this week can you do this? And they'd give us ridiculous things to do while they went and changed into a different character backstage. But I think they just went back to drink beer and would leave us out there long past the audience is interested in whatever they had given us to do. But it was brilliant fun, and it was very inventive, and that developed a huge local following. And again, it was all based around catchphrases and repeated bits and pieces and these silly games that they played and stuff. And yeah, on the back of that, they were courted by several TV types, including Jonathan Ross with his TV company, and that seemed the best fit, and it was good. So then they did the show on Channel 4, where they condensed it into down from 2 hours into half an hour, which Paul and I sort of helped out on. We did bits and pieces on it, did sort of script editing and stuff with them. And that, so that was all sort of running at the same time as we were writing with Harry his first sketch show, Harry Enfield television program, which Paul did a lot more performing on. I did little tiny bits and pieces, but we were both writing that with him. And then sort of through that process, Paul and I were collecting sketches, which for one reason or another weren't right for Harry's show. Either there wasn't a part for Harry, or he didn't like it, or whatever. So we were collating and writing a sort of separate sketch show at the same time, which we then managed to get the BBC to make, which we wrote and produced ourselves. So that was brilliant fun to have that degree of control, which I think the best comedies on TV are the ones where the creatives are in control.
Which was more the UK model. Like generally people that were in the show usually were creatively involved with the show instead of the sort of by committee thing that everything here was for years and years. And I think that's one of the reasons US television has gotten better and embraced more UK stuff, because we've sort of adopted that methodology.
And there's more sort of, the risk of sounding a bit poncy, kind of authored pieces, as it were, that have a strong personality to the show because of who's creating it. Because TV has just exploded in so many different directions and so many outlets for it now that all those models kind of coexist at the same time now, don't they?
Oh, I mean, you can do fantasy series for the Middle East now.
Yes. Only because you can't do fantasy series for UK.
Yeah, that's gone out of vogue after it was sort of the 70s and 80s. That was huge.
Well, the big time for fantasy here was in the 60s, which is when I was a kid. Not only did we have all those great American shows like, the likes of Star Trek, but we had loads of British shows that on the mainstream channels. Well, there was nothing else. The Avengers, not the Avengers with but the
Captain Marvel America, Avengers,
and Iron Man, but with John Steed and which I think was shown in the States. Wasn't it? I think it was one of the few shows we made that was shown in there. The original Randall and Hopkirk Deceased,
Adam Adamant, Strange Report, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so there was huge amounts of these kind of fantasy shows, and for kids there were things like Doctor Who, and we made a lot of that stuff, and it was very popular. But then we hit the 70s, and kind of social realism got its hooks into everything, and things were judged on how realistic they were, and things got quite political, and the whole sort of kitchen sink drama thing took over, and we've never really recovered. I mean, we still watch and through the 70s and 80s watched all the big American fantasy shows, but we stopped making them here. The Prisoner, that was the other big one in the 60s, which I loved. And we've never recovered from that. It's really, really difficult to make a fantasy show in this country, which is they'd say, well, it's fantasy, it's for kids.
Right, mostly because of Doctor Who, right? I imagine that's the...
Yeah, and Doctor Who's weird because it's quite difficult for them to sort of sell Doctor Who to other countries because they don't have that same idea of the big, reasonably big budget, early evening family drama, which we've had a history of, particularly on Saturday and Sunday nights. You sit down with the family and the kids watch it and the adults watch it. So it has to be sort of programmed into either, the kids channel or put it on a bit later night. But yeah, so in this country, if you try and do anything with fantasy, they'll say, well, that's for kids, isn't it? And of course, as soon as they say, well, it's for kids, you get half the budget.
Right. They don't know anything.
It's been really, really difficult. But, that's why I wanted to make Randall and Hopkirk Deceased when the opportunity arose, was I wanted to return to that great sort of grown-up madcap storytelling that isn't just another soap opera kind of thing or a police drama or a hospital drama. But again, I found I was banging my head against a brick wall. Although a lot of people that I got in to work with me on that went on to work on the revamped Doctor Who, which Russell T Davies did such a brilliant job of bringing back and reinventing and revitalizing. But again, it was for kids. So
this show you're doing is more adult?
Well, it's for whoever wants to watch it. I mean, it's kind of I suppose it's kind of pitched at the level of the sort of Marvel films,
okay,
The Witcher, that kind of young person's fantasy series. I mean, we don't have the budget of either of those two things, but we have the ambition. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to make a big fantasy series like that for here, but it's not going to happen. I've developed a few, pitched a few, and inevitably you end up being channeled towards Netflix because the terrestrial broadcasters don't really have the budget to do these things by themselves. Not if you're competing with everything else that's on Netflix. And then, it's, we've already got something similar to that in development.
We have a show that starts with A already.
Yes. So it was great to think, okay, Saudi Arabia want to do this big... It's based on the big best-selling Saudi Arabian fantasy series. It's kind of it's loosely in the sort of Arabian Nights kind of world, but because it's based on an actual contemporary thing, we're trying to keep it as far as possible with a strong Saudi Arabian flavor, and it'll all be in Arabic.
So that's interesting. So you're writing in English, presumably.
Yeah.
And then someone's translating it?
It then gets translated. But the big problem there is there's not really any one standard version of Arabic, because originally they were all just tribes. They weren't even countries. And they all have their own dialect and their own accent, and they're fiercely sort of protective of that. And it kind of, you have to tread very carefully in case it looks like you're having a go at this tribe or whatever.
Like someone who came from comedy, you're used to structure and wordplay and that sort of thing, and then has written novels for years and that sort of stuff. Doesn't that take a huge piece of your arsenal away from you in a lot of ways? Yes. But it's something, we're kind of working our way through. Because originally when I started writing it, I thought, because I always use humor in whatever I'm doing, because that's what the world is like. Everybody uses humor during the day. And particularly in fantasy, the fantasy that doesn't work, that looks really sort of clunky and pompous, is where there's absolutely no humor. Right. Particularly when, they might be doing quite ridiculous things and nobody's going to point out, what just happened? Did you see that? That guy turned into a bat. So I thought, well, there's no point in my trying to do comedy, dialogue, because it's not going to translate and it could easily get lost in the process. But I found I can't write it without that. And the characters are dull without the use of humor. But I've got, I have 4 young Arabic women who are based in the Middle East who are writing it with me. And they are bilingual. So their episodes they're writing initially in English. So we'll get it all done in English, and then they will be tasked with making sure that the translations work and that the jokes work. Because you can't just translate a joke. You have to adapt it, really. So it's not a translation, it's going to be an adaptation. And, we will have long discussions where we say, well, that joke works in English. That is not going to work in Arabic. But if we said it like this, that would be funny. And you think, well, yeah, but that's not funny in English when you say it like that. They say, yeah, but in Arabic, that's going to slay them, believe me. And you're like, but that's a totally different joke. And they're like, yes, but it's a joke. Yes. And that is, it's finding the Arab equivalent of what I've written. I mean, it's a weird one. The reason I got the job is that my lead director I did a big Jekyll and Hyde TV series here a couple of years back, and my lead director on that ended up working on a big Arab show out there for NBC. He's directing them. They're all speaking Arab. He hasn't got a clue what they're saying. So before filming, he would have to sit down with everyone and the translator and go through the script and say, this is what you're saying. I need to understand that. You need to understand that. So it's an adventure. Because it's interesting in Eastern pop culture, like China pumps out tons of fantasy series of like gods and ghosts and that sort of thing. And then the Japanese adaptation of The Monkey God was huge in the UK in the 70s with that Burt Kwok sort of revoiced version, although it was a little bit... it wasn't very referential for the original material. But we didn't even get that here. Like, so you even get a little bit more of that than we did in a sort of world context. But
you got all the kung fu movies and the that stuff.
The Shaw Brothers stuff and Ultraman from Japan and that kind of thing.
Godzilla.
And Godzilla and that sort of stuff. So it is weird what countries sort of pick and choose what things, and then you got a lot of like French cartoons or like the Magic Roundabout, that kind of stuff.
Yes, which again was completely revoiced and changed. But yeah, well, I mean, in some ways fantasy is quite exportable. If there's lots of action, magic, things going on, rather than getting involved in the minutiae of a family drama set in an alien environment. And actually, in somewhere like China, they're very restricted on what they can actually shoot anyway, so it's easier for them to shoot fantasy stuff.
Yeah,
which is slightly our position on this series, is that it's pre-Islamic. So that gives us a little bit more leeway to do interesting stuff with it.
Well, the allegory allows you to be subversive, which is sort of why sci-fi has always been a huge outlet for that. And it's interesting still in the 21st century, you're still able to kind of slide those sorts of things in where they work on the surface, even if someone doesn't recognize the allegory, and even better if they do.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing in doing this show is that the things I think they might have a problem with are probably not going to be, it's going to be something I haven't thought about. I don't know exactly how the society works. And you think, oh, I can't do that.
Right.
I was thinking I wasn't going to be able to do this bit, but you tell me I can't do that, but that's interesting.
You can't show milk? I don't understand. Some weird
they pitched it to me. They said, look, we want to try and make the Arab Game of Thrones, drawing on Arab fantasy and history in the way that Game of Thrones has drawn on sort of European fantasy and history. And I say, great, yeah. And they love violence. You can make it violent as you like.
Same as here.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's a weird thing, isn't it, as well, that how prurient American culture always was. And since the Hays Code, that you can show, it's a trite thing to say, you can show someone being shot to pieces, but you can't show their genitalia or them having a loving relationship with someone.
When I lived in the UK, it was so weird to me to watch like a pre-Watershed airing of a movie, of an American movie, because they would cut out violence and keep in sex and nudity. So, you're watching like The Terminator or RoboCop or something, and I'd be like, wait, like 2 minutes is missing. What happened here? And then you'd see, I'm like, this is so strange. It's like an alternate reality, but makes way more sense.
Yes, I know. It's a weird one because it's still in Saudi Arabia. If the characters aren't married, they can't really touch each other, let alone kiss each other.
Sometimes it's fun to write things, though. I mean, I think so. I don't know if you agree. Where you sort of need restrictions and rules sometimes to work, do something innovative or interesting.
Yeah, I think it does make it more interesting because, how many times really does seeing two people having sex actually advance the storyline or tell us anything or tell us anything at all, really, other than what these actors look like in the nude?
Which we can find on the internet.
Yes. Yes, very rarely does the sex scene actually say anything beyond, wow, they're really into each other. It's not bothered me at all, the restrictions, and I like working with restrictions, and I think all TV has built-in restrictions of some sort. We did a spin-off of one of the characters from the Fast Show called Swiss Tony, this car salesman who So we did a sitcom based in his car showroom because I had always wanted to do a classic sitcom. You've got your 3 regular sets, you've got your regular cast, you can have 2 or 3 new people in each week or whatever, occasionally a bit of location shooting. But, I loved that restriction of trying to make that work and having fun with that. That for me is much more exciting and challenging and throws up more ideas than somebody saying, and it's happened to me several times, somebody saying, hey, I really want to make a show with you, or I really want you to write a film for us. I say, well, what? Anything you like.
The sky's the limit. And then you're like, well, I don't know.
That's no good to me. At the moment, if I've got a great idea, I'll come to you with it, but don't just say to me, let's do anything because I want to do something with you. It's no good at all.
Yeah, it's funny when I look at the sort of post-Fast Show things that a lot of the alum of that show did, like Carolyn Ahern doing The Royle Family, which I think is just one of the best sitcoms of all time, but is very sad.
Yeah.
Or even Paul's Happiness, which was very sad and great. Although your books are very serious and sort of have a little bit of that tone, you went that Swiss Tony direction, which is more broad and in a different vibe. Is that always something that you performance-wise like?
I like comedy that makes you laugh. I'm old-fashioned that way, and
you don't want to feel bad about yourself for 3 or 4 days after.
I mean, all comedy now, well, not all of it. So much comedy now is about anxiety and things going wrong and people being horrible to each other, and it and a lot of it is branded maybe as comedy drama, but it's much closer to drama, and that's great, and a lot of that stuff is fantastic. As you say, something like The Royle Family, even something like The Office was close to drama on occasions. But this is what I always loved about Vic and Bob. It was just nuts, and it was, let's try and do something that'll make you laugh. And I like stupid comedy, and I like what I've always loved about the classic American sitcoms is that great snappy dialogue, which we don't really do here.
Well, there were rules there. It was, in sitcom writers' rooms, it was, one of the rules was you couldn't have a character leave a scene without a joke.
Yeah.
So like that sort of stuff. And then you have 20 people that have to be like, okay, we need this thing here. And it's just a totally different model. I think My Family maybe adopted that model in the UK. We had a writer's room.
They tried. Yeah.
But it's just not like culturally.
But it's also, it's not in the British psyche so much because, and I guess so much of that American humor, that wisecracking, fast talking, it comes from the sort of tradition of the New York Jewish humor, and just the New York Jewish character is what it comes from, and we tend to be more sort of blunt and Anglo-Saxon here, and also, a lot of British comedy, it's about what isn't said. Right. Rather than what is said because of our repressed nature.
Is there a quintessential English comedy show to you? Like if you were going to say to somebody, this illustrates it the best.
Well, they'd be the obvious ones.
Fawlty Towers.
Fawlty Towers, obviously, that's great farce writing and great character comedy. Dad's Army is what I grew up on and is still repeated all the time here, is just such a wonderful example of ensemble character writing. And ensemble writing is really hard to do. If you've got 8 characters in a scene and they've all got to contribute and be funny, that's really hard. And such amazing character writing. But
that is one complaint I have about the more auteur comedy is sometimes you'll see a show and you'll go, oh, every character talks like the writer of this show.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
I think a lot of Ricky Gervais stuff has become a little bit like that they're all Ricky Gervais talking to himself. Right. You cannot say, look, here's a genius comedy that everyone will love.
But Dad's Army aired here for a bit, which is strange because it is very English to me.
It is.
It would air sort of as filler late night throughout the 70s and 80s. And the people who caught it enjoyed it. I think it's interesting. It also never had a remake, which is odd because we remade Steptoe and Son, we remade Three's Company. They did a Young Ones in America, which is one of the worst things I've ever seen. They did a Red Dwarf.
Had two or three attempts at Fawlty Towers, didn't they?
They've had 4. And that story is amazing because one, they cast B. Arthur in the Basil Fawlty role, which I actually think was pretty good. And the one they did in the 80s is the most ridiculous example of non-creative people being in charge of something ever, where they literally went, I think the reason this isn't working is because of the Basil Fawlty character. So let's make the show just about the hotel. And it's
clever.
It's, if it was done intentionally as like an alternative non-comedy, it would be genius. But it's I watched that whole pilot with my mouth open. Like nobody was like, I think you're missing something here.
Well, but see, I think that's it. I think that goes to the core of the difference between the British comedy and American comedy. British comedy is very often about losers and people who are terrible at what they do.
Yeah.
Whereas American comedy, even though the character may be awful, unpleasant, whatever, think everything goes wrong, they are actually very good at what they do. So Frasier is a pretty good psychologist. Is he a psychologist or psychiatrist?
I think he's a psychiatrist.
As is his brother. And as far as we can see, their father was a very good policeman. But Basil Fawlty is hopeless. He cannot run a hotel. He has nothing that he is good at. And we love that. In Britain, we love small characters who are made even smaller.
Well, it's comeuppance. It's almost like seeing people get what they deserve, but in like a less Twilight Zone-y way. Like
we have this sort of... We don't want people to be too good at something. We get suspicious of them. So that does make it very hard to sell a lot of that British comedy. And I think that was the key problem with Fawlty Towers is maybe they should have made him. He fucks up everything else, but he knows how to run a hotel.
Yeah. There's a famous Hitchcock quote where he says, an audience will love any character that's good at their job.
Yeah.
Which is how you can make anti-heroes and bad guys. He's a hired killer, but he's really good at it, so we like him.
Yeah.
And it is interesting, especially Hitchcock, given his background, that he...
Yeah, because in England, we love everyone as long as they're terrible at their job.
Yeah. Like, everyone's as shitty as I am. Or it's like, it's sort of like a salve for imposter syndrome. Like, nobody's...
Because I was really interested in the success that The Office had in translating into American, and I must confess I never watched it because I just thought, David Brent, the Ricky Gervais character, he's not a great boss,
right?
And he's not very good at running the company. He is a loser, and that's why we sympathize with him in the end. So, would you say that the Steve Carell's version kind of grew out of that and became something different?
He's less, not that the Ricky Gervais character is malicious, but there's like a bad guy strain to him, whereas the Steve Carell character is almost like he has a head injury. Like you feel sorry for him.
Hapless rather than...
like he's just an idiot. And there's that sort of... The big difference I see in a lot of these shows, although I do think one of the reasons we see all these cringe humor things and the sort of everything goes wrong all the time comedy being so huge is America's almost caught up to Basil Fawlty 30 years later. Seinfeld being the biggest reason for that, because that's a show about 5 bad people. And so we got these shows about bad people doing bad things to each other. But
he's a good stand-up.
He is but he's the only one good at his job in that whole show.
Yeah, I guess so, probably.
Which was unusual for us, because when we did try to do shows about unlikable characters, there was a show called Buffalo Bill with Dabney Coleman in 1983. And it was Gina Davis, Dabney Coleman, Joanna Cassidy. really funny show, won a Golden Globe. Everybody hated it so much because he was an asshole. It was like a classic, Dabney Coleman character. But that show would do really well now. So I think that, to me, the big difference when I see the versions of these things is, like, the Ricky Gervais character knows he knows everything he says is bullshit. He's just like, and he is trying to fake it. Like, there's a big, like, hey, you screwed that up. No, I didn't. And here it's like, you screwed that up, and they're like, what was I supposed to be doing? You sort of feel sorry for them in a way, which is a bit of a cheat, I think, because it takes the blame away from them to do awful things.
Yeah.
So it's a way for us to be like, yeah, that was awful, but he doesn't know any better. Where it's like, no, he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's done this.
But in the American version, is the company more successful? I mean, is there?
No,
it's still a small time operation.
Yeah, it's so the first season of it, they literally use the same scripts, and it doesn't work at all. And then
I've heard that it got much better when they did their own thing.
They did the adaptation, which is what you kind of have to do. And they focus a lot more also on, like, the Pam and the the relationship character stuff. It almost becomes like a Cheers kind of thing. And that's always interesting to me, because, like, Cheers is one of my favorite shows and is a pretty atypical American show. And if I compare that to something like Early Doors, which is like the closest equivalent maybe I can think of.
Cheers is better.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But just tonally, the way that you handle a show about alcoholics, which basically they are, people hanging out in a bar during the daytime. It's not really going to be anything else. And that illustrates some of the difference to me, like, sort of how you look at those people. And it's more of like those poor people versus, like, yeah, screw that guy. Like Alan Partridge, no one thinks he's a good guy. Except for him.
even that, the more it's gone on, there is a creeping sympathy for him.
Which I wonder if that's just from familiarity, because he's almost like...
Well, I think for the English, it's because we like a loser. We don't like the sort of alpha male. We don't like intellectuals. We don't like people who are a little bit too clever for their own good. People who are always winning.
Yeah.
We like the underdog, the loser, the hapless fool. And you sort of side with them after a while.
Yeah, even if I look at The Young Ones, which is, one of my favorite shows, and I said this a million times on this show, but that, I caught that by happenstance, and it was the episode with The Damned on it when I was a kid, and I was like, I've never seen this before, but this is everything I like in the world, and I didn't know it existed. And I had The Damned on this show, which was very odd. Talked to Vanian for a long time. But all the characters on that are losers. They're bad at their cliche role. Like, even as someone who's like, I'm an angry punk rocker, you look at Rick Mail and you're like, what a dick. He's not cool. None of them are cool.
No, except for the guy, the Chris Ryan character.
Oh yeah, Mike.
Mike, who nobody ever liked.
Yeah, he's the coolest one, and he's the one no one likes.
Yeah, I presume the story that the part was created and originally written by Peter Richardson, and knowing the other stuff that Peter Richardson does, you think, yeah, that would have been interesting and funny and would have made sense. But you think, well,
he's the only non-stand-up. He's just an actor.
What's he doing? Yeah, they should have cut the character altogether. They didn't need it.
Yeah, it's very strange how that sort of works. And then the U.S. pilot, they had Nigel Planer play his same role, and the rest were all Americans. It was like they were like, yeah, that's the guy. We need that guy to play this role. And then it's very strange. I don't get why... they don't do a total translation. They actually did an American version of the Royle Family here, which I don't know if I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's called The Kennedys. Yeah, it had Randy Quaid in it.
Yeah, and I think it was also directed originally by the same guy that had done the Royle Family, who was our director, main director on the Fast Show, Mark Mylod, who now does Succession and stuff like that. He was always very ambitious. He wanted to go to America and do that stuff. So I think he did the Kennedys. He also did the American version of, what's the one similar to the Royle Family about the family kind of living in the caravan up north?
No, I can't think of it either. But
Shameless.
Yes, Shameless, which is very popular here.
Is it still called Shameless in this?
Yeah, they called it Shameless here, and that's been going on for like 8 seasons. And
right.
Very popular.
I think he set that up as well. So, yeah.
There's a weird thing too I've noticed about, when I was doing stand-up in the UK, there were people who are wildly successful, have their own TV shows, doing very well in the UK. I am not a super successful stand-up comedian here, but they'd be like, man, I'd love to go over there and really do it there. And I'm like, stay here. Like, you got it pretty good. But there's a long history of, people coming over here, like Billy Connolly coming over and doing a terrible sitcom that was really bad for him. And it was like, you're doing great stuff.
Alexi Sale doing joining the
Keen Eddie or
the Golden Girls.
Yeah, which is like a socialist.
I mean, it's so few Americans, British manage it in whether it's comedy or films or anything. I mean, I was really pleased for Hugh Laurie having that massive success with House.
But a drama.
Yeah.
Just Stephen Fry's in a lot of stuff here, but he's playing almost a cartoonish version of Stephen Fry. Things,
Well, even back in the day, John Cleese going over and doing some pretty terrible stuff.
Oh yeah.
I mean, particularly with comedy, British always hate it when a Brit goes over and turns up in an American sitcom because they are never funny, and I think it is because it is a different culture, and I think the directors don't know how to direct them. Yeah, they just think, "Why they said that in English? So that sounds funny."
It's almost the same. Bobcat Goldthwait had a really good insight about when Robin Williams is bad in things, and they were friends, and he always says, well, Robin Williams is bad in things when people hire him and they go, and then you do your Robin Williams thing, and then and it's like, no, he's very talented, you need to direct him to do something. And I think that happens with a lot of English comedian people where they're like, then you do that English comedy thing, and then we move on to the next scene, and so they're like, okay, here's it, and it doesn't work because it needs a little bit of
have any Brits had any actual success in a long running success in an American comedy series?
I mean, aside from Jane, what's her name, who played from
Jane Lees,
but that's not quite it. Craig Ferguson was on the Drew Carey show playing an English person, which is hilarious. But even that wasn't huge. No, I can't think of a single one. There was an English actor in The Jeffersons, but was not someone who was of note here. Yeah, I mean, every single one of the Pythons has had a sitcom here, and it's all failed. Eric Idle did one where he played a ghost. That didn't work. They just don't. I don't know why. Because we'll accept them in movies. That's fine.
Yeah.
But even if they're here playing a character, we want them to play an American character, or even like Harry Enfield. People know him here from Burger King commercials.
Yes,
you know what I mean, and that's silly. Or like they know Paul from Harry Potter or something. It's very weird, and it's I don't know if that will change, but you're lucky that it doesn't in some ways because you get to keep a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, it's always feels like a bit of a loss when someone goes over there, and I suppose interestingly, Ricky Gervais, although he's not really done an American show, he's made a hell of an impact over there, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, and people. He leans into I'm the asshole who says things you're afraid to say stuff, which in a lot of ways is sort of a very American fantasy,
Yeah.
you know, and they're like, and he can get away with it because like he's English and smart. So it's like, so it's sort of a unique, weird thing. But yeah, that's the only one I can even imagine that's sort of close. You know, it's the US version of Space was terrible. The IT Crowd version was terrible.
Yeah.
It's, even though those aren't uniquely British concepts at all, like it just, the tone doesn't shift. The thing that makes those shows interesting doesn't here. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very strange. But like Vic and Bob, no one knows who they are here. And their stuff
well, I
would
tell
never
you,
work.
what we're talking earlier about going over to do Just for Laughs in Montreal, which I'm sure you know.
Yes,
Sure you've probably talked about it before on your show.
Joe Brand had a great story. She told me about Milton Berle being a complete prick to her. Where she doesn't know Milton Berle, and he's a notorious asshole. Like he's a terrible person. And she was standing backstage, just kind of, you know, standing, waiting to go on. And he goes over to her and goes, "Don't worry, girlie, I'm not going to touch your titties." She was like, "Who the fuck is this guy?"
Oh dear.
And they're like, "That's Milton Berle." She's like, "Fuck it off."
But no, I mean, going over there as I did and seeing, you know, the big gala night at the end, and because Channel 4 was filming it, and I guess they had put money into it as a result, it meant that the cream of the UK comedians over there would play at the gala in front of an utterly bemused audience.
Yep.
As I say, the only person I saw really who cracked it was Craig.
Yeah.
Because he came out and he was like an American stand-up, and they were going, "Oh, okay, I get this." But the funniest stuff was going out with Vic and Bob, because all the British the acts would do a sort of practice warm-up gig in this sort of smaller club in town. And again, all the English acts would bomb there.
Of course.
So they would get even more terrified of doing this gala thing, where eventually it would get shown on Channel 4, and they would have to add in quite a lot of laughs.
Oh yeah, we'll fix this.
But seeing Vic and Bob out there was just extraordinary of an audience not knowing what the hell was going on, and it's quite funny because Bob is quite sensitive and takes everything. You know, he's very aware of what's going on. Vic does not give a damn,
which is why it's great.
He almost prefers it if people don't laugh and don't know what's going on. He's got that sort of ornery streak in him, a bit like who was in Taxi and
Andy Kaufman.
Yeah,
but he was an actual crazy person.
Yeah, yes, but that thing of seeing how far he can take it in winding up an audience. You know, Vic has got that, and it doesn't become embarrassing because his front and his confidence never cracks. He's always there in his immaculate suit. I am the king of light entertainment. Well, his audience go, what?
What is that? But I feel like in my outsider view, when I would see British comedy like that, and the great thing about Big Night Out, which I have watched the TV show, and I am totally baffled by. Like, there is stuff where I feel like I'm watching Buñuel or, like, you know, David Lynch's weirdest stuff, you know, like a guy made of walnuts or something. But I'm enjoying it. You know, I'm like, I don't get this at all, but it's interesting. And in the US, and as a stand-up who doesn't do jokes and that kind of stuff, I feel this a little bit too. Audiences would rather know what's going on and laugh than see something interesting or be intrigued. They don't want something that's going to make them lean in and go, what is this? They just kind of want to experience it and move on. So if you're doing something that's challenging, instead of feeling more engaged, they feel like you didn't do your job, which is a strange way. It's a totally different way to watch stuff. And I think that might be part of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I mean, a lot of British people are absolutely bemused by Vic and Bob. So the chances of a lot of Canadians getting it was zero.
Right.
But I think that was the funniest night I ever had, was watching them do their act in that little club. It was funny because I'd been there the year before, and it was kind of like the sort of the tail end of the in the 80s where the comedians were all doing a lot of stuff about taking drugs and being out of order and
Right.
that kind of I'm a
Rock star comedy.
yeah. I'm a edgy outsider. And then the year that Vic and Bob were out, it seemed to be the year where there'd been a bit of a change, and all the American comics were doing. So I got married, and the audience go, "Woo, yeah!" And each
So
other
I'm
ring.
single.
Yeah, and it's great. Being married is great, but and they'd go into some fucking anecdote. So Vic and Bob come out and they do a bit of pretend to be dinosaurs for a bit. And then Vic says, so I've recently had a child. I go, whoa, okay, we get that, yeah.
We like child.
Woo, yeah. He's called Ian. Woo, yeah. And he's a crab. At which point it's like, what did he say, crab?
Are we happy or not about that? I don't know.
Yeah. And I've got him in this handbag. And he would open a handbag and stick the microphone in the handbag. And he loved to use bits of old sort of newsreel and sort of old BBC voices. And he would pretend to talk to the crab, and it would just be recordings of this person, I think was talking about the arboreal rainforests of Scotland. Interviewing his son, the crab, about the arboreal rainforests of Scotland. At which point, the audience is frozen. Like, what? The ground had fallen away from beneath them. But, for us that knew them at the back by the bar, the small British contingent were just in puddles on the floor.
It's worth it for that.
It was.
Is there anything that you, obviously you've been very busy in lockdown, is there any comfort shows you have, though, or anything you watch, like old stuff you watched when you were a kid, or anything you kind of go back to if you just need to chill out?
Not necessarily going back to kid. I mean, in terms of comedy, a thing that I go back to and I could watch over and over and over is a Larry Sanders show, which I think is probably the greatest comedy ever made. And that is interesting because he was a complete arsehole in that.
Oh, yeah.
Larry Sanders, as was Hank.
Yep.
And to a certain extent, what's his face?
Rip Torn is,
yeah. Rip Torn. But again, gets away with it because he's a good chat show host. The show is popular, and is he Artie, the producer?
Yeah, Artie. Yeah,
he's a good producer,
right?
And he knows how to fix things and make things work. And so I guess that's how they got away with it. I mean, also it was it HBO? It
was HBO. So they were able to get away with it. Again,
you didn't have the same problems as being a network show, but I mean, it is so well written and such great character stuff on it, and that ability and willingness they all had to sort of show the nastiness and the dark side and the hollowness of it all. I just think it is absolutely sublime, and I've because it was only shown sporadically over here. You had to really pay attention and grab it when suddenly, 11:30 tonight, it's on. But eventually, and it wasn't that long ago, they brought out the whole box set on DVD. So I could sit and watch that over and over again. Because
the world it's parroting, again, isn't that well known, or the cliches and the tropes of that isn't quite as common in the culture. This will sound like a totally weird analogy, but to me, the Larry Sanders Show is the opposite of the Muppets. In that the Muppets, it's all very likable backstage characters, and everything that's part of the show is a mess, because like the quintessential Muppet sketch is someone trying to sing a song and a monster ruins it. So it's like the exact opposite,
that's interesting.
Which is a very sort of more English aesthetic and approach, which makes sense because they were making it in London, but was hugely popular here, but again, aimed at, or thought to be aimed at kids. Which is sort of a strange thing. That's the only thing I can think of that sort of is American that works like that.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Interesting one.
It's a bit of an odd analogy, but yeah.
No, it's both about the backstage life and show business and how it works. And yeah, well, again, Kermit is like the complete opposite to Larry Sanders. He's desperately trying to make everybody be happy and get on with each other. And even if the show's not great, they'll still be friends.
Right. It's at the expense of the show.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas Larry Sanders, I will kill you if it makes the show better.
Yeah. As long as for that 1 hour every night, I look good on TV.
Yeah. And my life can go to shit as long as that show is good. Who cares?
I had one self-indulgent musical question for you, or two actually, and then I'll let you go because I know that you're very busy. But one of them is when you were doing the Higsons, one of my favorite bands who's super obscure here, and I don't know if you ever encountered them, was Adrian Borland and the Sound. Did you guys ever play with them?
It doesn't ring a bell, I'm afraid.
Okay,
no.
All right. I always am curious.
What sort of a band were they?
They were on Korova, so they were a bit Echo and the Bunnymen, but they're the band that I always say sounds like the reputation Joy Division has. So they're the band that are as good as the reputation of Joy Division precedes.
And was that the same sort of era, sort of mid-'80s?
Yeah, they were a punk band in the mid-'70s called The Outsiders, and they put out 2 records, and then they became the Sound in like 79, and they did about 5 albums. And toured with U2, and they're amazing. He was an amazing songwriter. He's no longer with us, but they're just this hole that I see in musical history. So I'm like, how does people not know?
I shall have to look into it. Maybe it'll jog some memories.
Yeah, I always wonder if people play with them.
But no, I don't think we ever played with them.
So who were some of the contemporary bands that you were a little bit later than like Gang of Four and that sort of stuff, right? But in that similar genre.
Yeah, a little bit. They were school friends of my oldest brother, actually, did the Gang of Four. Well, we ended up as a sort of a fairly obscure, largely forgotten strand of early 80s music, which was sort of punk funk. There was a lot of percussion and rhythm and sort of African influences and stuff, but played slightly too fast.
Yeah, but you're on Two-Tone, right?
We had a couple of singles on Two-Tone, yeah. Two-Tone were trying to branch out. They realised that ska was kind of over and they needed something new. So us and a couple of other bands came in to nail the last few nails into the coffin for them. Like
Rip Rig and Panic, I think, was one of them kind of doing.
No, I don't think they did. But they were in Rip Rig and Panic was kind of in the sort of area of what we were doing. Of that, yeah.
Who I also love, Nana Cherry, who are also on the Young Ones.
But who did we play? We supported the Ramones in Chicago.
Oh, interesting. Oh, so you did play the States.
We did 3 American tours, yeah.
Oh, wow. Did you play Boston? Did you play the Rat?
I think we did play in Boston, but I can't remember where.
It was probably either the Rat or the Paradise. I'm thinking it might have been the Channel.
It was that weird thing where, if they'd played your single on college radio, you could do a gig there and people would turn up, and then you play anywhere else, no one would.
Yeah, it's a little spots.
New York was always good. There were the clubs there that we'd play in. And yeah, we had a few interesting supports, as I say, including the Ramones in Chicago, where we played even faster than normal.
Which probably went over well.
It was probably quite similar to Vic Reeves in Canada, actually. As there we are in our colourful shirts, blowing trumpets and hitting things. Whilst they're just waiting for the Ramones to come on.
As someone who is in a punk rock band, also I've experienced that many a time myself. You don't sound exactly like the headlining band. What's happening? That's what they want. And my other musical question, as a musical person, do you have an all-time favorite TV theme song?
Oh, it has to be a song?
Or what else could it be? Like a song from a TV show?
Well, or just the theme.
Oh, yeah, the theme, yeah.
Well, Batman was pretty good.
Yeah, that is fantastic. It is the classic.
And it's always annoyed me in every Batman film made since. They've never come up with a proper Batman theme of any kind. I don't expect them to do no, but something, at least.
Prince tried.
Yeah, but it
doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's the same with all the Marvel films. It's just like, I don't know any of the soundtracks or the themes. What's the Iron Man theme?
I feel like people like in scores have moved away from sort of true themes. Like Superman clearly had one, like different characters have their song,
and it's part of the enduring appeal of Star Wars, James Bond is those themes. It's pushing the buttons. It's the catchphrase type of thing, really.
Oh, you're a big Bond guy. Did you ever hear the original version of that Bond theme when it was from that it's from like an Arab musical?
Well, it was an Indian musical. Yes. I think it was played on this. It was originally written to be played on the sitar.
Yeah.
the twangy guitar line. And no, is there a version of the original?
Yeah,
I don't think the musical was ever made.
No, but John Barry was in like a band before that, I think.
Well, it was Monty Norman who wrote that.
Or yes, whatever. There was some band recorded. I've seen versions of it from the 50s or 60s on YouTube now recently. It's kind of curious.
I'll have to dig it out.
It's very interesting.
Theme tune. Yeah, Batman was pretty good. There were a couple of shows from my childhood which you wouldn't have got in the States, but anyone of my age, there was a version of Robinson Crusoe that was always played on kids' TV in the UK for years. They'd sort of get to the end of the series and then run it again. And it was originally a German series, I think. So it was sort of narrated over, someone would have to narrate the whole thing.
Right, like a radio show.
Vaguely hear them talking in whatever language they were talking in the background. But it had the most evocative theme music. And you can check it out. It's on YouTube.
I'll look that up.
But that's one of the ones of people from my generation, because it was on so much, and it was played over these waves breaking on the beach, and the music would play. And I think there's been at least one version done by one of those sort of ambient electronic bands.
Oh, okay.
So that was a good one. I loved all the 60s ones. The original Randall and Hopkirk, the Avengers. The Prisoner one's
great.
all those shows, those were great.
A twangy spy movie, surf rock, monster rock kind of thing,
and quite sophisticated at the same time.
Oh yeah. That Prisoner song has like 3 movements in a minute.
Yeah.
As the show often does. Yeah.
Very fast bongos.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. That just the opening of that. That's an opening to like My Son's a Crab. That's an opening where you see that opening of that show and you're like, what the hell's happening? But you want to know. You're not just like, well, I don't understand it. They've screwed up. It's not Gilligan's Island. I'll say that. It's the anti-Gilligan's Island. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad that we were able to do it. I know that you're super busy, and I appreciate you taking the time.
No, it's been great fun. Thinking back over some of this stuff.
There you go. That's Charlie. What a good guy, fascinating guy, and again, done so many amazing things in so many different areas in his life, and continues to. I'm looking forward to that Middle Eastern fantasy show that he's working on. Wrote the Enemy series of books. Just you can't go wrong checking out anything he's done. And the Fast Show has just some of the funniest things ever. I was rewatching I think it was Arthur. Oh man, I can't remember the character's name, but that's the worst. My washboard. It's just funny. So yeah. If you have guests you'd like me to try to get on the show, please feel free to email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@icanread.com, or I'm on social media at Kenneth W. Reed, REID, or at TV Guidance. Whoever you request, I always try to get them. I don't always succeed, but I do indeed try. And if you are feeling generous and you want to give to the Patreon, which is patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor, even $1 a month helps with the show. I'm not out doing live shows, so that's usually, or conventions, which is usually how I supplement this stuff. So anything helps, and I appreciate each and every dime that people do contribute to the show. And even if you don't contribute, I just like that you're listening. So we'll be here next week for a brand new edition, and I hope to see you then for that brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
I like comedy that makes you laugh. I'm old-fashioned that way.